The American West, a land of vast plains, rugged mountains, and endless skies. Pioneers, adventurers, and outlaws were all drawn to this untamed frontier. For some, it was a chance to start anew, to build a better life. For others, it was an opportunity to escape the law, to live by their own rules. The West was a place where fortunes could be made and lost just as quickly. It was the era of the cowboy, the lawman, and the outlaw. This was the Wild West, a time of both romance and brutality. And it was in this world that John Wesley Hardin, one of the most notorious outlaws in American history, made his name. John Wesley Hardin was born in Texas in 1853. He grew up in a time when violence was a part of everyday life. Hardin himself claimed to have killed his first man at the age of 15. Whether or not this is true, it is certain that Hardin was no stranger to bloodshed. He lived a life of crime, gambling, and gunfights. His quick temper and deadly aim made him both feared and respected. He was said to have killed over 40 men in his lifetime. Some say it was closer to 25. Whatever the true number, Hardin's reputation as a cold-blooded killer followed him wherever he went. He tangled with lawmen and outlaws alike, always ready to draw his pistol at the slightest provocation. His name struck fear into the hearts of many. He was a wanted man in several states. The reward for his capture grew with each passing year. Hardin's life was a tangled web of violence, romance, and tragedy. His story is a reminder of the lawlessness and brutality that defined the American West. John Wesley Hardin was born into a turbulent world. It was 1853 and Texas was still wild. The young Hardin family, led by Reverend James Hardin, a Methodist circuit rider, moved frequently. They carried with them the values of the frontier: self-reliance, resilience, and an unwavering belief in God. But it was a harsh environment where violence was often the only language understood. The shadow of the Civil War loomed large, casting a pall over the nation and seeping into the very fabric of daily life. Even as a young boy, John Wesley showed a rebellious streak. He was quick-tempered and strong-willed. He chafed against the constraints of his religious upbringing. The world outside, raw and untamed, beckoned to him. He was drawn to the stories of cowboys and outlaws, their lives filled with adventure and danger. The call of the wild was strong, whispering promises of freedom and excitement. The die was cast, and John Wesley Hardin was set on a path that would lead him down a dark and dangerous road. The line between lawman and outlaw was often blurred in the untamed West. For John Wesley Hardin, that line was crossed early. At the age of 15, during a dispute with a freed slave, Hardin claimed his first life. Whether or not this event actually transpired, as Hardin recounted it, is debatable. What is certain is that this incident marked a turning point. It ignited a firestorm within him, a thirst for violence that would consume him for years to come. He became a hunted man, constantly on the move, always looking over his shoulder. The law was closing in, but Hardin was always one step ahead. He honed his skills with a gun, becoming a deadly shot, feared for his quick draw and cold-blooded accuracy. He became a legend in his own time, his name whispered in saloons and around campfires. Life on the run was harsh but exhilarating. Hardin drifted from town to town, gambling, drinking, and always ready for a fight. He lived by his wits and his gun, a dangerous existence that fueled his legend. Women were drawn to his rugged charm and air of danger. Men feared his temper and his deadly accuracy with a pistol. He was a ghost, a whisper of danger that haunted the territories. For John Wesley Hardin, violence was not just a means of survival. It was woven into the very fabric of his being. He walked with death as a constant companion, the shadow of the gun never far behind. He saw threats in every glance, an insult in every word. His temper, always simmering just below the surface, could erupt with volcanic fury. In the heart of Texas, in the town of Horn Hill, Hardin's quick temper flared once more. An argument with a former soldier, a man named Bragg, escalated with lightning speed. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night, and when the smoke cleared, Bragg lay dead. The killing sparked a manhunt, but Hardin, a phantom of the plains, vanished into the vastness of the West. Hardin sought refuge in the lawless towns that dotted the frontier, places where men settled scores with bullets and whiskey flowed like water. Saloons became his battlegrounds, gambling dens his refuge. He lived a life of danger and dissipation, his days and nights fueled by adrenaline, alcohol, and the ever-present threat of violence. In Abilene, Kansas, a town notorious for its wild ways, Hardin's path crossed with that of a local bully named Wild Bill Hickok, a legendary lawman. Their encounter was tense, a clash of titans, but surprisingly no shots were fired. Hardin drifted on, leaving a trail of whispered stories and bloody legends in his wake. In every town, his name evoked fear and admiration in equal measure. The Texas frontier was a breeding ground for vendettas, and Hardin found himself drawn into one of the most vicious of them all, the Sutton-Taylor feud. This bloody conflict, rooted in the chaos of the Civil War, pitted two powerful families against each other in a cycle of violence that seemed to have no end. Hardin, always eager for a fight and loyal to a fault, sided with the Taylors. He became a key player in this deadly game of revenge, his gun adding fuel to an already raging fire. The feud raged on, consuming lives and tearing families apart. Their paths crossed again, this time in a tense standoff in a crowded saloon in Hays City, Kansas. Hickok, now a seasoned lawman, recognized Hardin instantly. The air crackled with anticipation, the silence broken only by the clinking of glasses and the murmur of hushed voices. Hickok approached Hardin's table, his hand resting lightly on the butt of his revolver. Their eyes met, a silent battle of wills. For a moment it seemed as if the entire saloon held its breath, bracing for the eruption of violence, but then, in a move that surprised everyone, Hickok relieved Hardin of his weapons, disarming him in full view of the crowd. The American West in the aftermath of the Civil War was a land in flux. It was a vast, untamed territory, sparsely populated and struggling to shake off the chaos and bloodshed of recent years. The reach of the law was tenuous at best, often lagging behind the rapid expansion of settlements and the influx of fortune seekers, adventurers, and outlaws. This vacuum of authority created a breeding ground for lawlessness, where disputes were often settled with the barrel of a gun rather than the gavel of a judge. The discovery of gold and silver, coupled with the expansion of the railroads, drew thousands westward, lured by the promise of riches and a fresh start. In such an environment, where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye, it is no wonder that lawlessness prevailed. The Wild West was fertile ground for men like John Wesley Hardin. The absence of strong law enforcement, the prevalence of firearms, and the general atmosphere of lawlessness provided ample opportunity for ambitious and ruthless individuals to carve out their own empires. Hardin, with his hair-trigger temper and deadly accuracy with a gun, was tailor-made for this environment. He thrived on the danger, the adrenaline rush of living on the edge, where survival depended on being quicker and deadlier than the next man. Men like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and the Dalton Gang became folk heroes to some, symbols of rebellion against an often unjust and unforgiving society. They became larger-than-life figures, their names whispered in saloons and around campfires. In the absence of formal law enforcement, a rough code of conduct emerged in the Wild West, a set of unwritten rules that governed social interactions and provided a framework for justice, however imperfect. This code, often romanticized in later years, emphasized personal honor, self-reliance, courage, and loyalty. It was a harsh code, unforgiving of weakness or perceived insults, and it often led to violence. A man's word was his bond, and any perceived slight against one's honor or that of one's family or friends had to be answered for, often with blood. While the code of the West provided a semblance of order in a chaotic world, it was often a brutal and unforgiving system. John Wesley Hardin, for all his faults, adhered to this code in his own twisted way. Violence was an inescapable part of life in the Old West. It was a constant companion, lurking in the shadows of saloons, simmering beneath the surface of everyday interactions. John Wesley Hardin, born into this world, embraced violence as easily as he drew breath. From his early years, Hardin witnessed violence firsthand. He saw it in the eyes of hardened men, heard it in the crack of gunfire, and felt it in the weight of a pistol in his hand. He lived in a world where justice was often swift and brutal, where the line between right and wrong was blurred by necessity and self-preservation. He was a product of his time, a dark reflection of the lawlessness and brutality that permeated the American West. The long arm of the law finally caught up with John Wesley Hardin in Pensacola, Florida in 1877. After years of evading justice, his run from the law came to an end on a train platform. He was arrested for the killing of Deputy Sheriff Charles Webb. He was extradited back to Texas to stand trial. The trial was a sensation. Despite his claims of innocence, the jury found Hardin guilty of murder. The notorious John Wesley Hardin was headed for the cold confines of a prison cell. Hardin's arrival at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. No longer a freewheeling outlaw, he was now subject to the strict rules and harsh realities of prison life. The years that followed were a far cry from his days of gunfights and saloon brawls. He spent his days in a cramped cell, surrounded by the dregs of society. The constant noise, the lack of privacy, and the ever-present threat of violence from fellow inmates wore on him. He witnessed firsthand the brutality of prison life, the casual cruelty that men inflicted upon each other when confined within those unforgiving walls. But prison, for all its hardships, also provided Hardin with something he had not experienced in his years on the runtime for reflection. He began to read voraciously, immersing himself in law books, philosophy, and the Bible. He even started writing, pouring his thoughts and experiences into a memoir, a raw and often self-serving account of his life and crimes. In 1894, after 18 years behind bars, John Wesley Hardin was granted parole. He was 41 years old, a shadow of the brash young outlaw who had once terrorized the Texas frontier. He moved to El Paso, hoping to outrun his past and start anew. He married again, fathered more children, and became a practicing attorney. But the old John Wesley Hardin was never far from the surface. On August 19, 1896, his reputation caught up with him. While playing dice in the Acme Saloon, Hardin was shot in the back of the head by John Selman. John Wesley Hardin's death, like his life, was shrouded in violence and controversy. Was it a cold-blooded murder, an act of revenge by a fellow lawman? Whatever the truth, Hardin's demise cemented his place in the annals of the Wild West. He was buried in El Paso, his grave marked by a simple headstone. But Hardin's story did not die with him. His autobiography, published posthumously, ensured that his name would live on in infamy. John Wesley Hardin's story serves as a mirror to a bygone era. He was shaped by the lawlessness and brutality of the American West. His life reflects the harsh realities of frontier life. Hardin's story highlights the contradictions of the American West. A time of great progress and profound violence, John Wesley Hardin remains an enigma, a complex figure, a man who lived by his own code and paid the ultimate price.